I'm going to start this podcast, as I do all of them, by promoting our sponsor. Unfortunately, though, Quasimodo and Esmeralda can't buy this product that's all about convenience and affordability over in their country of France. I think they will be all right, though. That country has plenty of other great drinking options. But if you're a Canadian or an American, you can set up a membership in the Autopilot Coffee Club and find your new favorite from Sparkplug Coffee. Sparkplug. C'est magnifique. Sparkplug offers premium quality beans, which will make the best coffee you've ever brewed. This yummy stuff is so much better than takeout, and it's cheaper cup for cup, mug for mug, than it is at a coffee shop. Sparkplug will even deliver right to your door. Those whose door is in Canada won't even have to pay for shipping. Hit up sparkplug.coffee/HYES and give it a try. Using our HYES promo code will get you a one-time 20% discount. Mon Dieu, bonne idée. Bonne idée? Good idea. Okay, I probably butchered some French just now, I definitely did, and I'll probably butcher some more in the rest of this review, but let's get to it anyway. And action! Have you ever seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or Notre Dame? I'll probably say Notre Dame a lot today. We've always said it that way over here, haven't we? Bonjour, mes amis, and merci for listening to the 628th, that's 628 podcasts on this channel, and it's a classic movies podcast known, you probably guessed this already, you did, it's Have You Ever Seen? My name is Ryan Ellis, the fella who only swung from a bell tower that one time, and it didn't turn out well. Zoot, my coccyx. My wife Bev isn't here because it's not a Monday. She'll be back with us in 3 days, though, and that'll be a fun episode. Today's monologue will be filled with spoilers, but also a little dose, or maybe 2 little doses, of tomfoolery. If I can make you smile or even laugh a few times during these podcasts, in addition to throwing lots of facts and figures at you, then all the better. And even though the story is very serious, there's some fun to be had here. So The Q-Man and His Lovely Lady was released by RKO Pictures on December 29th, 1939. That means this extravaganza will be 85 years old in precisely 1 month. As far as I can tell, the flick was a hit in that very competitive year of 1939, although I couldn't confirm where it ranked in the top 10. I do know that Gone with the Wind was the biggest hit that year, and it remains the biggest hit ever when you adjust for inflation. In any case, it's good that Hunchback pulled in quite a few viewers because it was not a cheap production. RKO sunk in some serious bucks to get this thing made. Speaking of when this came out, by the way, it was actually first shown to the world in August of 39. Appropriately, since it's a movie about Paris, it played at the Cannes Film Festival before its December release in Hollywood and I guess around the world. Around the world was probably later. It usually was back then, months later in a lot of cases. Anyway, although it wasn't even really screened in front of a big crowd the way you'd expect at a festival. According to the Cannes website, the festival's first ever year was that one, 1939. And this flick got in a viewing. Then they had to pause their plans for the rest of the movies being shown when Germany invaded Poland. Then war was declared and the organizers had to cancel the whole festival outright. Stupid Hitler. He just messes everything up. Before I tell you about Rotten Tomatoes numbers and the awards and such, let's toss out a little plot description and explain who some of the filmmakers are. William Dieterle directed the movie. I saw something about how it's pronounced Dieterle, with a le sound at the end, but I've always heard Dieterle, so I'm sticking with that. Sonia Levine and Bruno Frank adapted Victor Hugo's famous novel. Charles Laughton plays the Hunchback, Quasimodo. Maureen O'Hara plays a gypsy named Esmeralda. Cedric Hardwicke plays Frollo. I'll probably say that different ways in this episode. A vicious and extraordinarily selfish religious man who works in Notre Dame. He raised the orphan Quas and is smitten with Ezzy. The bell ringer's smitten with her too. And then things go bad. Frollo kills a man and blames the girl for it, but his adopted son saves her, and a big old ruckus kicks up in and around Notre Dame. By the way, Frollo's first name in Hugo's book is Claude, and I think it is in some of the other adaptations, but Wikipedia says it's Jehan, Jahan, in this film. If they said his first name, I don't remember hearing it. They changed it apparently for censorship reasons, so I'll just try to call him Frollo and not refer to his first name at all then. I'm sure I'm getting the last name wrong too. But what about a nutshell? So The Hunchback of Notre Dame, in a nutshell. Sloth loved chick. Not chunk, but chick. If you're a Goonies fan, you should get that one. I thought it was clever. All right, let's discuss those Rotten Tomatoes numbers. This only has 17 critical write-ups on there, but 16 of the writers liked it. That's 94%. The average score they give The Hunchback is 8.6 out of 10. It's just a little worse than that on the popcorn meter, the audience thing, at 87%. William Dieterle actually has a couple of perfect scores on the tomato meter, and a lot of others in the 90s. For that matter, Charles Laughton was in many films that have better reviews on the Tomatoes site than even Hunchback does, including 2 motion pictures we have covered before, Mutiny on the Bounty and Spartacus. He's got something like 5 movies with 100% freshness. Now, I didn't check if there's only maybe 4 or 5 reviews or 10 reviews, but still, 5 films, perfect reviews. The story's been told quite a few times over the years, although not all that often as a big screen adaptation here in North America anyway. But 2 of those are the 1923 silent film with Lon Chaney as Quasimodo, and Disney's 1996 animated film, where Demi Moore is the voice of Esmeralda. Tom Hulce from Amadeus is Quasimodo. Rotten Tomatoes speaks pretty well about those films too. The Lon Chaney film gets 93%, and the animated one, okay, this isn't so great, but it's at 72%. It's respectable, I guess. The 1939 version, though, was up for 2 Oscars, not winning either of them. John Ahlberg, A.A.L. Berg, his sound was a candidate, and so was Alfred Newman's music score. And I'd say the film was worthy of being up for more than just that. The sets and Laughton's performance were very award-worthy. They built this huge set on the RKO Ranch. I don't think they shot a foot of this film in Paris, Notre Dame or anything, so somebody had to design and put all this together. It's impressive. The American Film Institute didn't forget this very old film when they started putting out top 100 lists back in the 90s and the 2000s. They had Hunchback 98th on their top 100 passions. The film was also nominated for the top 100 thrills. Thrilling, I guess, at times. And Quasimodo's shout of "Sanctuary! Sanctuary!" was a candidate for the top 100 quotes. 2 more AFI plaudits. Frollo was up for the top 50 villains, and Newman's composition was a candidate for the top 25 music scores. Okay, then that's what people with credibility think about the Hunchback. Well, most of them have credibility. Some of them are probably hacks. But what does this hack speaking to you now think of it? Well, here goes. And stop insulting me. Me? Oh, before I break down the plot, I should address Quasimodo and the word gypsy. Generally, people seem to be saying the Q as a K in this movie, so Quasimodo. I've always heard Quasimodo, so that's probably how I'll pronounce it during this episode. Although if you think about it, here in Canada, Quebec is actually pronounced, apparently, Quebec is how they would say it. The French would say it. We always say Quebec. Anyway, so I'll go with Quasi. And if I insult the man's looks, the whole point is that he's hideously ugly. I'm not going to do what we're supposed to do now in the 2020s and just pretend he's as beautiful as anybody else. Because he's not. As for gypsy, which apparently is offensive, I read it was actually based on Egypt. And that's offensive? I don't know why. I only recently learned that. I guess it's a slur. Anyway, that's what they're called throughout the movie. What's the better word now? Roma? I'll try to remember to go with that, even though it sounds weird and wrong to me. Roma? If hearing gypsy a few times today is a bridge too far for you, then have a good one. Maybe we'll catch you on the next podcast. For those of you who are still here, I will tell you that the Notre Dame movie opens with music, credits, and a title card that calls this Victor Hugo's immortal classic. That sure is setting a high bar for your movie. We based our film on a classic, and it's immortal too. I sure hope this turns out to be at least good after a build-up like that. And if not, boy will our faces be red. It's the end of the 15th century, and France had been... I shouldn't mock the movie, actually, because I did like it quite a lot. It's the end of the 15th century, and France had been at war, but has now found peace at last. Louis XI is the king of France. There were 10 guys who went by Louis before that. Geez, guys, throwing a few Andres and Philippes now and then. Appropriately, we get some bells ringing off the top. As the story proper gets going, the king, the chief justice, and our villainous man Frollo are visiting a printing press. And it's the Gutenberg press, in fact, which will be used to mass print books. I think it's Frollo who says, a small pest can destroy a kingdom. He doesn't recommend they have a book burning party exactly, but I bet he was thinking it. The Evan O'Brien character Gringoire comes up here, and the contemptuous Frollo calls the poet a heretic. But as for Frollo, he's just such a stereotypical dude with power. He's afraid of the written word because that would educate people. He hates Gringoire because he is educated and outspoken, and he's soon going to be terrified of his feelings for a pretty girl. So let's get this straight. Don't read, don't think for yourself, and don't let a good-looking woman turn you inside out. People in power, they're always about the same. Meanwhile, the gypsies are arriving in Paris. The one we'll follow for the next 2 hours, Esmeralda, sneaks away from her family's wagon and joins the crowd going to the festival where we'll see the king, but she'll also catch sight of the Festival of Fools. Dieterle uses a lot of fast cuts here to show us a bunch of hijinks and tomfoolery. Esmeralda dances and all the guys rave about how pretty she is, and who can blame them? Maureen O'Hara plays her. Our boy Quasimodo, who was mentioned in the printing press scene, but this is our first glimpse of him, was watching all this under this stage. He's legendary because he does ring the bells way up in the towers of Notre Dame, and they all hear that, obviously. But I guess he doesn't often venture down to the street like this and show himself. Once he's spotted, all these jerks round him up and put him on display, and he is quite ugly, with his lopsided eyes and the great big hump around his shoulders. They'll make him the king of fools, which he doesn't want at first, partly because he's deaf from all the bell ringing he's done his whole life, so he doesn't even know what they're saying. Plus nobody's speaking French. What's with all this English? But once they give him a jester's hat, he's into it. Who can refuse a silly hat? And hey, this thing's no more ridiculous looking than that crown King Charles wore at his coronation last year. He looks so stupid in that thing. It looks like it cost 15 cents. I know it probably cost millions. It's so cheap looking. It turns into a huge celebration. All of that puts a gigantic smile on Quasimodo's face. No matter the reason for any of this, it did my heart good to see the guy grinning so much. Joy is joy, even if they're not truly honoring the guy. It's mocking. What's that Robin Williams joke? They're not laughing at him, they're laughing near him. But Frollo poops on this party, breaking the scepter they gave to Quas and glaring at the bell ringer into slinking away with him. I believe it's the next time we see Q to the Modo that he's back to the ringing of the bells. Only now he gets to do his job with his fool's hat on his head and a great big smile back in his face again. Esmeralda, meanwhile, tries to see the king, the actual king, not the one of fools, but the guards demand to see her papers, so she runs off, slipping into the church for sanctuary. I'm guessing a gypsy, Roma, then and now tends to be paperless. Gotta get the papers, get the papers. She's astute enough to see that Frollo is quite evil, so he counters by calling her a witch. You're evil! Well, you're a witch! What is this, a presidential election? Quasimodo shows the babe his face, and she isn't horrified exactly, but she does run away, taking off down the street with the hunchback hobbling right behind her. He finally flanks her and grabs the lovely lady, carrying her off over his shoulder. Maureen O'Hara must have been a slow runner, very slow, because Laughton runs with a limp, yet he still keeps up with her very easily. A gang of people, including a street poet Gringoire, put a stop to what is a kidnapping. Then a guard named Phoebus locks eyes with, and instantly clicks with, the lady of everyone's affections. She's moony-eyed right back. For his part, Gringoire has a sack put over his head, and now he's effectively the one who was kidnapped and brought to Clopin, the king of the beggars. Clopin is Thomas Mitchell's character, who's busy stabbing and killing a guy. For what reason? I was not sure about why he just stuck a knife in some dude. One of the beggars desperately wants to hang Gringoire, so Clopin puts street rapper Grandmaster G to a test, and he fails it, and he is about to be strung up until Esmeralda pipes up and tries to prevent the lynching. The only way to actually keep a rope off this wordsmith's neck is if she's willing to marry him, so she agrees. Does she even know Gringoire at all? Helping save the man's life is one thing. This is something else. They're led off to the supposed bridal suite and light a fire, both literally and figuratively. This might be a time when things would get romantically intense, but he's the one who's all swoony and emotional. She'd probably be doing the same thing if this was Phoebus in front of her. But it's not. He lays in her lap and goes on about how crazy he is for her. But all she wants is Phoebus. Ding, 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 ding. Geez, lady, it's your wedding night. Don't talk about another guy. Think it, sure, don't say it. Even though it stings him to know that she won't have him as her husband, maybe she'll have him as her friend. They'll be more like brother and sister. He gets distracted by a ruckus down below, and she takes that moment to slip away. Frollo appears to love cats, and a lot of them. I don't think we ever see this bushel of cats with this guy again, do we? Then he demands one of his underlings find out where they took Quasimodo, who's in prison. I guess he should be punished somehow for trying to abduct Esmeralda, even if Frollo was the one who told him to do it. Since our man is deaf from all those clappers that have been bonging in his ears all these years, he can't understand what the guy in charge of the jail is saying, and that guy is so bothered by that he sentences Quas to be whipped and then pilloried. You know, this story, or RKO's adaptation of it here at least, maybe the book doesn't do some of these things, I don't know, but this take on it actually has ties to the story of Jesus. Quasimodo and Mr. Christ are good people who don't want to hurt anyone, yet they're feared and persecuted, then have to deal with a kangaroo court and get a cruel punishment. Of course, Jesus' punishment is a lot worse. I don't think Jesus had eyes akimbo and liked to hang out all day in bell towers, though. Maybe he did. What does the Bible know? Dieterle cuts to some workers talking about how wrong it is to flog a cripple, so at least somebody realizes it's a moral mistake to treat someone with a handicap the same way you would a common criminal. Although the big guy is really more of a social cripple than a physical one. We're going to see evidence later of just how strong and capable Quasimodo is. But anyway, niceness need not apply here because Quasimodo has his shirt pulled down, and he is in fact whipped in front of the masses. Perce Westmore did a great job on Laughton's face makeup, but he didn't forget to make the guy's body look hideous too. And that large torso is pretty cut up after the whipper gets up to 31 lashes. Well, there's as much blood as they could get away with 35 years ago. It's a lot older than that. And even though Laughton was wearing the fat suit and has all that padding in the hump, he suffered for real during this scene. I guess Dieterle had him do a lot of takes too, which had to be brutal. You often hear stories about that, the old-time directors, and sometimes even the newer directors, that put an actor through hell, and you wonder, is this just revenge about something that who even knows? I didn't read that these guys didn't like each other very much, although I think Laughton didn't like him so much after this. The whipper starts to get tired from all the lashing, although Quas is barely showing any evidence of real pain. That seems like a mistake to me. He's tough, but he's not the Hulk. And just as I was writing that line down about how superhuman he seems to be, they cut to a woman beefing about how, that's no whipping, he didn't even shed a tear. So I guess that's why he doesn't cry out in pain, so she can say that and nobody has to feel sorry for somebody going through this. Well, you do, but you'd feel more sorry if he was wailing the whole time. But I just wonder how much even a great big dude like this can take. The archdeacon looks down from Notre Dame and doesn't like what he sees in the town square, but he rattles off some crap about God and, I don't know, whatever will be, will be. Oh, by the way, I think the archdeacon is Frollo in the actual story, but they separated them. There's a censorship thing and morals and I don't know, but he's a separate character here. And while the Modo man no-sold the whipping, he starts hollering at the crowd once he's in the pillory stage of this punishment. They mock him, he bellows at them. And this treatment is supposed to last a full hour. After some of that hour has passed, Quasimodo cries out for water, but no one's willing to pony up any Evian. But if you know this story at all, you know that Esmeralda cares, and she brings a canteen up for the hunchback to sip out of. This is a lovely scene, especially the touch when Laughton pulls away from her at first, then slowly tilts his head back to accept the H2O. This is one of the more famous moments in Victor Hugo's story, and is played very well by both of them, but especially by Charlie Lotz. After he's finally released, he stumbles back to Notre Dame. Laughton does a great job of playing the discombobulation. The crowd scatters once he gets remotely close to any of them. Look, you ninnies, I don't think you have to worry about the guy attacking you or hurting you. He's got other things to worry about, considering how banged up he is from the treatment he just received. He might hurt me. But Quasimodo recovers pretty quickly and is so head over heels about the lovely lady that he's pretty quickly back to ringing the church bells, even when he's not supposed to. His body might still be in pain, but the scene is pure joy. A pretty lady was kind to him, which maybe makes all he just went through worth it. Frollo is head over heels for the pretty lady too, hunting her down in the gypsy camp and telling her things that she'd love to hear from, say, Phoebus. He wants her for himself, though, and if he can't have that, it will be my end and yours. Healthy relationships. You don't have to be told flat out that once Frollo got a night or two of quality bumping in with her, he'd drop her like a stale baguette. And this isn't about her specifically anyway. I don't think so. It's about how much he wants to express himself horizontally with a beautiful woman, any beautiful woman, but he's not supposed to be doing things like that. She's scheduled to dance, and Frollo lets her get to it, but guess who's there in the crowd? Good old Phoebus. And the sexy couple end up off on their own, making moony eyes at each other again. They even throw out a bunch of I love yous, even though I don't think they know each other any better than Frollo or Quasimodo know her. But he's handsome, and they're not, so love. But alas, their kissing ends with Phoebus being killed. We don't see Frollo do it, but it's obvious that he did. Esme is the one who's blamed for it, though. Once he's back in the church, Frollo straight up admits to the archdeacon that he did it, saying he's bewitched by her and he couldn't help himself. I guess the I can't control my urges, so it's all her fault trope is not a modern trend. I suppose if you could time travel to, 3,000 years ago, you'd probably see a man being mad at a woman for making him want her by the mere fact that she exists, and his desires are all her fault. The Deke says he can't help a murderer, so Frollo deduces that she has to die for bewitching him. He'll blame her for Phoebus's murder and get away clean. And his word goes a lot further around here than some young Roma no one even knew before a few days ago. The archdeacon is appalled and won't hear of it. When Frollo says, "You are my brother," the response is, "I'm no longer your brother." Gringoire finds Esmeralda in prison. Esmeralda? It's her and a goat in there. She says she knows Phoebus didn't really love her, but she's still pretty unhappy that he's dead. The Grings is in brother mode, though, and vows to get her out of there. He wants to use the printing press we saw in the beginning of the film to get an appeal out to the masses, but the authorities bust in and say they're going to tear the thing down. They might as well torch a few books while they're at it. They bring the goat into court and suggest Our Lady is a witch, hence her ties to said goaty goat. If you've seen the movie The Witch, well, you see goats there. They're possessed and evil. And Frollo condemns her because she won't admit her guilt. I haven't seen any version of Hunchback in a long time. I have seen this, but it was at least 25 years ago, I think. So I forgot just how evil Frollo is. And he's well played by Cedric Hardwicke. He's not twirling his mustache, he's just subtly the devil. But Quasimodo pipes up and says, "It wasn't her, it was me," which only gets a loud bellow of laughter from everyone in court. Wait, hang on here. You were scared of this guy before. You know that punishment he got was for abducting a woman, but you can't believe he's capable of more violence? I love Quasimodo's character, and we know he didn't do it, but let's face it, he is capable of hurting someone, even if it's in a Lenny from Mice and Men kind of way. I will love him and squeeze him and what's that? Like Bugs Bunny comics? Cartoons. Since this is a kangaroo court and she was guilty before anybody was even sworn in, she's sentenced to be tortured until she confesses, although she looks almost as fresh and beautiful as ever when they bring her back to court. The archdeacon comes up with a test. He has her blindfolded and places his own dagger and the murder weapon in front of her. She fails the Pepsi challenge because she touches the killing knife. I didn't really get this. How does that make her guilty if she touches the wrong knife when she can't see them? Maybe I'm dumb. Which means that Frollo is free to sentence her to be hanged the next day. And the goat will be strung up too. I guess if you believe in religious nonsense, it almost makes sense. The animal's wicked and they can't let it start hanging out with some other beautiful babe and teaching her how to be all evil once Esmeralda's dead. This is still stupid though. Dieterle and his cinematographer Joseph August came up with a great shot, and this is certainly not the first one I could have talked about. When as the hanging is about to commence, Laughton is framed between two gargoyles up in the church. That's not even the best part of the look of this scene. It's that he's slouched down with his elbows up in such a way that he looks like one of the gargoyles himself. You could argue he always looks like a gargoyle, but it's hard to dispute it right here. The archdeacon says he won't hang an innocent woman, but Frollo just keeps on insisting that she's a witch and must die, so she'll hang without penance. Everyone just watches as she's led up to the gallows. Well, Gringoire tries to do something, but Clopin blocks him, knowing he'd end up dead too. Quasimodo has no one interfering with his attempts at heroism, though, so he swings in on a rope, knocks over a guard, and swings Esmeralda back to the church. Here's where that AFI-nominated "Sanctuary" line comes into play, as Quasimodo yells that and gets a huge positive reaction from what is a very fickle crowd. They love him, they mock him, they're afraid of him, now they love him again. It's like he's Aaron Judge. After bringing Ezzy some food, the bell bonger starts to leave. Bell bonger, bell bonger, bell bonger. So she won't have to look at his ugly face. But the kind lady gets up and brings him back to sit with her. What a nice thing to do. For a guy who barely spoke for over an hour of the running time, the big guy has a lot of dialogue in the rest of the film. He's not Al Pacino and Glengarry Glen Ross or anything, but he speaks fairly often now. You just cost me $6,000. $6,000 and one Cadillac. And the one thing I will take slight issue with in Laughton's otherwise fantastic performance is that he probably should have more of a monotonous voice. Maybe not all deaf people speak in a monotone, especially someone who could hear at one time, then lost it because of his job. But he actually sounds like, well, Charles Laughton when he gets all monologue-y here with her. I'm just driving at the fact that when you can't hear your own voice, it's hard to modulate how you speak. Put your hands over your ears and talk. You sound, everyone's done this, right? You sound so different. And that's for a few seconds. Tried that for many years, many decades. Oh, and by the way, do more than maybe 3 people in the entire cast even try to sound like they're French? I know, I've excused actors before for not overdoing it with actorly things like committing to a massive weight loss or working for months to find the perfect accent. That's what acting is, isn't it? No, it's convincing us you're the character by not just obsessing about small things. Well, that helps too, I guess. Anyway, all these people are either French or from that area. Do they all have to sound so American? Or at least most of them? Or I guess English. A lot of them sound like they're from London. Back to Esmeralda and the Quas. She asks why he saved her, which is of course because she showed him pity and gave him water. And that happened only the day after he tried to drag her off. She's the forgiving sort. He lets her know that she can't leave the church or they'll hang her, and they'll probably kill him too. And I guess they would, wouldn't they, for aiding and abetting a convicted murderer. Quas shows her his bells, and he's named them all. If I had all these bells and decided to name them, one of them would be Gus. Anyway, he says, the big one made me deaf, which is another blanket of sadness on this character. He treats these things like they're his friends, and yet they hurt him a long time ago. He starts bonging, which must again confuse the townsfolk, who probably didn't expect to hear bells at this time of day. Quas even goes as far as to joyously jump on one and ride it like Slim Pickens rode the bomb in Dr. Strangelove. Of course, he forgets that her ears can't really take this noise, so she collapses in pain behind him while he's cackling and riding that bell. Yee-haw! Woohoo! Woohoo! The powers that be get Frollo to sign a paper addressed to the king, saying that sanctuary and the church must be overturned. They're just itching to kill this woman, aren't they? Clopin wants to organize all of his people to march into Notre Dame and save Esmeralda, but Gringoire thinks he can free her by creatively using the legal system. Writers think they're all smart or something. He should start a podcast. Anyway, the fickle masses aren't on board with the men in power. They don't want sanctuary suspended, and they're so fickle. Although here come Clopin and his fellow travelers to enact some vigilante justice. They're going to get justice, and also revenge. They'll save her from the nobles who want to hang her, or she'll die while they try. A lot of Roma converge on the town square right outside Notre Dame. There's a great Gangs of New York shot from high above that shows them meet from 2 different streets and merge as one big sea of people. The Gangs of New York reference, I mean, is the opening when they all, 5 of them? Different gangs converge in the middle. Quasimodo defends his turf by dropping giant planks of wood and rocks to make the crowd flee, like boulders, I'm talking about here. But that backfires when they take one of the enormous planks that he plopped down on them, and use it as a battering ram to try to knock down the door of the church. The Q-man keeps raining heavy stuff down on the attackers, though, and does crush some of them. But the French are too many. Perhaps I'm dumb, or Q just didn't understand that these people have the same purpose that he does, to save the girl. But he just keeps on dropping stuff on them, including hitting Clopin, which doesn't kill him right away, as it probably should have, but does hurt him. In any case, fellas, you're on the same side. I guess that's part of what Hugo's getting at here, is that they should work together and they don't. Things get really ugly when Q dumps an enormous vat of, I thought, boiling oil down onto them, but I guess it's actually supposed to be molten metal. What's that doing up there? Oh, maybe to make the bells. I guess that's where you would do it. You can't carry those things up there. Maybe that's what it is. In any case, a lot of it spews out of the mouths of gargoyles and pours down onto the street, which was a nice visual. Okay, horrible visual, considering how dangerous this is, but a great shot. Or at least a good shot. Frollo finds his adopted son way up at the top of the church and they scuffle for a bit, but Quasimodo's too strong and just picks up the evil Frollo and throws him down to his death. Yeah, I never learned how to ski. Meanwhile, Gringoire lets the crowd know that the king has pardoned Esmeralda, and also all the gypsies are free to live wherever they want in Paris. That part seems a little tacked on, but whatever it takes to get them to stop rioting, I guess. And why not? The king had Frollo's confession to the murder, so everything is all wrapped up in a nice little package. Our girl doesn't need to die now, and Quasimodo can't be blamed for helping someone who wasn't a murdiddly-erdler. Gringoire finds Clopin laying in the street, who dies after Gringy rubs it in that the seaman should have waited for this exact legal procedure to play out, as he told him it would. The quote-unquote brother and sister are reunited, and they're pretty happy about it. I don't think they're in love, or will be in love, but they're together anyway. Q can only watch from high above as G and E walk off together. He'll have to live with the fact that he did a good deed for a sexy stranger, while that poet guy runs off with the girl. To end the film, the Quas sits by one of his gargoyles and asks, "Why was I not made of stone like thee?" Laughton plays it mournfully, but he's not crying and doesn't seem too heartbroken that she just leaves after all he did for her. Maybe he knows this is where he belongs, and she belongs somewhere else, not up there with him, or in the church with him at all. Movies back then, you're not pairing up this guy with that woman. They probably wouldn't even do it now. But with joyous music and an impressive camera pullback from a close-up of Laughton, we're out. That was another great shot, great way to end the film. So the cast. Charles Laughton was obviously no matinee idol, but the man sure could act. As I said in a review I wrote about a movie I'll bring up in a minute, Charles Chaplin was funny, Charles Laughton was witty. Although he wasn't really witty here, or when he played Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty. He was witty in Spartacus, though, playing a scheming senator. A scheming senator? He and Peter Ustinov are a lot of fun together. Plus he directed Night of the Hunter. We reviewed all three of those films in the past. Night of the Hunter was, I think, just last year, maybe? And Spartacus and Mutiny on the Bounty are long ago in our past. Oh, and I have to recommend you check out that movie I said I wrote a review for many years ago, Witness for the Prosecution. Billy Wilder directed that. Laughton's terrific in it, and so is Marlene Dietrich. That might be the best thing she ever did. We haven't reviewed it, but maybe we should someday. I read plenty in the past few days about how many different guys were in the running to play the Hunchback. Lon Chaney Jr., so Lon Chaney played him in 1923, but now his son could have played it here, supposedly. Orson Welles was talked about. He hadn't even come to Hollywood yet at this point. And then someone else I'll talk about in a minute or two. But they got the right guy. This is Laughton at just about his best, and he really commits to being Quasimodo without eating every bit of scenery. It'd be so easy to overdo this character. Who'd make a good Quas these days? Well, Dustin Hoffman is way too old now, but I think he would have nailed this role if he'd had the chance 30 or 40 years ago. I'm not saying he's ugly, you put makeup on him anyway, but I think he could play the angst very well. He's the actor in his generation with about as much range as anybody else. Also, he seems to have great admiration for Laughton. In the original AFI special, he says, "He's brighter than you are," while talking about Charles's performance in Mutiny on the Bounty. Maureen O'Hara was a beauty, but more importantly, she was tough and feisty in not just this, but in other films like The Quiet Man. She worked with John Ford a lot, actually, and he was the man in charge of The Quiet Man. She was also Susan's mother, Doris, in Miracle on 34th Street, so we reviewed her twice before today. And I have to recommend something we've never covered, but I like it a lot, Only the Lonely, the wonderful dramedy directed by Chris Columbus and starring John Candy in one of his better roles, and I guess one of his last roles, too. O'Hara's his mom, his disapproving mom. She did that film at the end of her career, but she was at the start of it in 1939. She was only 18, going on 19, about to turn 19, but she was only 18 when they started filming. So this wasn't her first film, but it was one of her first. We've now covered 6 Thomas Mitchell films, and he had a huge year in 1939. He won an Oscar that same year for his work in John Ford's Stagecoach, plus he also played one of the reporters in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and he was, I believe, Scarlett's dad in Gone with the Wind, all the same year. Tom also went on to be the dunder-headed Uncle Billy in It's a Wonderful Life. That's going to come up again in a few minutes. And that's one of several films, including Mr. Smith, that he made with Frank Capra, and he was also the mayor in High Noon. So we've covered all those in the past. Most of them are a long time ago. In fact, I guess all of them are a long time ago. As for Cedric Hardwicke, he was the narrator in The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I tackled on my own earlier this year. He also had a role in The Ten Commandments, one of the biggest hits of all time, and a movie that Bev and I discussed way back in 2016. This is strong work here. You could play Frollo's evilness in a lot of ways, but underplaying it is the right choice in his case. I think I read Basil Rathbone was going to play the character, but Hardwicke was a pretty good second choice. Edmund O'Brien, making his film debut here, was the double agent cop in White Heat, a film I love, and we reviewed it several years ago. He was also in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and The Wild Bunch. I talked about how Mitchell won that supporting actor Oscar for Stagecoach, while O'Brien won that same award 16 years later for The Barefoot Contessa, which was a year in which 3 guys from On the Waterfront were nominated, but Eddie beat them all. So we've covered, by the way, White Heat, Liberty Valance, Wild Bunch, not Barefoot Contessa. His filmography beyond all those movies, though, is fantastic. Look him up. He did a lot of great stuff. And I also said, I think on White Heat, he got old fast. 1949 to 1969 it was with Wild Bunch. He looks like he aged 50 years, not just 20. Alan Marshall, who plays Phoebus, was in After the Thin Man, and I covered the original Thin Man just a few months ago. He was also in a Sherlock Holmes movie that same year, 1939. This is the first time he's come up, though, on Have You Ever Seen? The Archdeacon was Walter Hampton's role in this. He just came up in Sabrina, which we covered, mid-February? So he's Bogart and Holden's dad in Sabrina, another Billy Wilder movie. He also played a stage actor in All About Eve, one of the highest-ranked movies on AFI's original list. Hampton was only in about 30 films in total. He was more of a stage actor, so that casting in All About Eve made plenty of sense. Stage actor plays a stage actor. Their director was William Dieterle. I don't believe we've covered this man before today, although he did direct prestige biopics like The Story of Louis Pasteur in 1936 and The Life of Emile Zola, in 1937, both of which were big Oscar successes. Emile Zola represents his only nomination for Best Director. That film won 3 trophies, including Best Picture, although he didn't win Best Director, just got nominated for it, while Louis Pasteur won 3 trophies too. The great Paul Muni was the star of both of those and even won Best Actor for the Pasteur flick. Funny thing about Muni, he could have been the one to play the Hunchback, but I guess he didn't want to. But if he had, then he would have been directed by Dieterle yet again. What's that, 3 times in 4 years? And I talked earlier about how Germany started World War II by getting in Poland's face. Well, Dieterle was German. He'd been in Hollywood for nearly 10 years when that Nazi mess got going, so it's not like he fled because he was worried about persecution. He was already gone. And I guess persecution in Hunchback of Notre Dame is a perfect theme, considering what was happening in Europe in the late 30s and into the mid-40s. And also what we're seeing and probably about to see in America today. Let's repeat some history, idiots! Sonia Levien, Levien, got screenplay credit. I guess she was the one who had to adapt the French language into English. Her filmography is pretty extensive, including Drums Along the Mohawk and Oklahoma, the musical. She also took home a Gold Naked Guy for writing a movie called Interrupted Melody in the mid-50s. Bruno Frank wrote this thing too. He had a hand in jotting down the words for things like Heart's Desire and Sutter's Gold. Heart's Desire, Sutter's Gold. Nope, I don't know them either. And their script was, of course, based on Victor Hugo's 1831 book. I just finally saw The Man Who Laughs, by the way, the silent film from 1928. Looked good on YouTube, very good print. And Victor Hugo wrote that book too. Pedro Berman was the producer. He did that job for nearly 40 years, often for Katharine Hepburn projects. He was given the Thalberg Award in 1977, and he got that at least partly for producing such big titles as Bev's favorite, Swing Time. She hated it. But also The Picture of Dorian Gray and Blackboard Jungle. All 3 of those have been talked about on this channel at one time or another. Robert Wise was one of the 2 editors on this, and the great Alfred Newman composed the music. Wise is better known as the director of The Day the Earth Stood Still, West Side Story, and The Sound of Music, but he also edited Orson Welles' first 2 classics, Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. Every one of those films has been talked about around these parts, every single one of those 5 I just mentioned. And you know what? Take away Wise's big titles, all those ones, and the huge hits he was involved in sometimes as well, even if they weren't that respected, and you'd still have a guy with a tremendous filmography, especially some of the gritty noir films he did back in the day. Things like The Setup, the boxing film. I saw it again recently, 1949, I think it came out. He's a guy, John Sturges is another, that I put in the camp of directors who are never put in the pantheon with the greats, but maybe they should be. Joseph August shot the pretty black and white pictures. They're so pretty. He was behind the camera for a few other Dieterle flicks, but also for Gunga Din, which was another big-budget RKO production that came out that same immortal year of 1939. That was a George Stevens movie. I don't think we've ever previously reviewed an August film before now, though. And of course, anything this old is going to be in the 4:3 ratio. I recorded the film off TCM, so I assume they're using a Blu-ray print or whatever their digital thing. It just looks great in any case. especially for something that's 85 years old. Oh, as for Alfred Newman, I've been talking about people who've won Academy Awards the past few minutes. Well, Newman won 9 of them, although not one of them was for one of the several films that we've covered in the past that he composed, which are Wuthering Heights, Ball of Fire, Miracle on 34th Street, and All About Eve. He was also involved with music making for The Grapes of Wrath, It's Wonderful Life, and he worked with Chaplin on the scores for City Lights and Modern Times. Chaplin, I think, was the actual composer, but he was involved in the music production. The last person to get some kudos from me is Perce Westmore. His makeup on Laughton is fantastic, including, of course, giving the man a convincingly deformed body, too. I guess the two of them didn't get along, but at least what got on screen was great. And if they had bad friction between the two of them, oh well. They helped make a good movie. That's all we really should care about. They didn't like each other, but no one died. Oh, and fun note, we have a serious hunchback here, but we had Igor, a funny hunchback, in Young Frankenstein just last month. Marty Feldman, genius in that movie. As we start to come to the end here, I can say I dug on this movie, and more than I expected to, actually. Hardwicke is solid, O'Hara was always an underrated actress, and Laughton is just phenomenal. Most of the cast, wrong accents or not, do a fine job too. I think, by the way, that Laughton is trying to sound at least a little French, but the English actors, like Hardwicke, do the posh British thing. Mitchell sounds like he always did, and O'Hara sounds like she went straight from Ireland to downtown Paris. Oh, and just a bit more about the other versions of the story before we do wrap. There have been some TV movies. Anthony Hopkins played Quasimodo on the small screen in the early 80s, for instance, and there was a straight-to-video sequel to the Disney flick that came out about 22 years ago, so what's that, maybe 6 years after the 96 movie? But this has only been made into a big-screen movie, by Hollywood at least, 3 times. And it's only once since this version, which was the animated Disney picture in 96. So we are way overdue for a fresh, live-action take on the Hunchback. Plus, there have got to be a dozen actors, probably 200, who would kill to play this part. I mentioned Dustin Hoffman. Well, he's too old now, but the other Hoffman, Philip Seymour, would have been perfect for this. He's just too busy not being alive anymore. And for going on 11 years, believe it or not, same year that Robin Williams died, Hoffman also did. And I'm not saying Phil would have been perfect just because he was chubby. That would help, sure, but that guy would have just plumbed the depths of Quasimodo, just like Charles Laughton did. So that was how I saw The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Notre Dame? I'll get to the promoting section in a minute or so, but first, let's get into the trivia section. Let's see you flex your movie brains. So question number 1. What were the names of the 2 humpback whales in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home? I just talked about a hunchback, now name me some humpbacks. Question number 2. In honor of Thomas Mitchell being in this movie today, how much money does Uncle Billy unintentionally hand over to Mr. Potter on Christmas Eve in It's a Wonderful Life? And question number 3, what was John Hughes's directorial debut? Answers to those questions are imminent, but first, here's what's coming up in the next few weeks on this channel. Bev will be with us again on Monday when we talk about The War of the Roses. We covered Kathleen Turner's incredible debut in Body Heat earlier this year. Now we get to enjoy her chemistry with Michael Douglas in Danny DeVito's Very Dark Comedy, and that was the 3rd movie they made together that decade because they made the 2, Romancing the Stone and Jewel of the Nile, which was a sequel, and then this came out after all those. The next time you hear me on my own, though, I'll be doing a show about The Polar Express. So yes, War of the Roses with Bev goes up on the 2nd, and Polar Express goes up on the 9th. And that's a Monday, but it's Bev's Monday off in December. I ask that you rate and review us on your app. Also look for us on YouTube. Hit up at HYES Ellis in your browser and enjoy the content, or just bookmark the channel. And the content's the same as this, with a simple graphic as your visual aid. You can subscribe to that channel, but also comment as much as you want, and hit that like button too. We're also on Twix. Elon. I'm at MovieFiend51. Bev is at Bev Ellis Ellis. She uses that at on Threads as well. And we're always reachable by email. It's haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. We're sometimes very slow to respond. I just spend so much time preparing podcasts that I sometimes look at emails and don't respond to them. But eventually I'll get to it. Or even read the email on air and answer the question. And head over to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Apply that HYES promo code in the right box and snag a 20% discount. All right then, the answers to those trivia questions. Number 1. What are the nicknames of the 2 humpback whales in Star Trek IV, The One with the Whales? George and Gracie, which is a reference to George Burns and Gracie Allen, 2 comedians from a very long time ago. If you're 25 or 30, I bet you don't know what I'm talking about at all. Question number 2. How much money does Uncle Billy unintentionally hand over to Mr. Potter, on Christmas Eve in It's a Wonderful Life? $8,000. What would that be adjusted for inflation? So much. And the evil old man gets away with keeping it, which seems impossible in the era of the morally righteous Hays Code, but he got away with it. And I, like probably a lot of you, will be watching that movie in about a month. A little less than a month. And question number 3. What was John Hughes's directorial debut? Of course, he wrote Vacation and maybe a few other things. Did you think it was The Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller? Nope. It was 16 Candles. All right, that's that. Thanks for listening. Come back to this channel again on Monday when we gab about the War of the Roses. Meantime, I'm going to give bell ringing another try. I can't possibly plummet 5 stories and nearly die again, right? I'll put some stickum on my hands this time. That story might or might not be true. And cut.